You know, the way we've understood and treated mental illness has been this long, complicated, and let's be honest, often brutal journey. It's a story packed with shifting philosophies, some truly revolutionary ideas, and some pretty tragic failures. And this history, it directly shapes how we all think about the mind today. So let's dive into this evolution, from ancient rituals all the way to modern community care.
But before we jump in our time machine, let's just ground ourselves right here in the present. About 1 in 5 American adults experiences mental illness every single year. So this isn't some fringe issue affecting a few people. It is a fundamental part of the human experience for millions. And today, a survey found that 90% of Americans believe mental and physical health are equally important. But here's the thing, that idea is incredibly new. To really get why and to appreciate how far we've come, we've got to look back. So yeah, how did we get to this modern understanding? To figure that out, we have to trace a path through centuries of belief, fear, and discovery, a time where, frankly, the treatments were often just as terrifying as the illnesses themselves. So here's our roadmap. We're going to look at 5 major shifts in thinking. We'll start when the body was seen as the problem, then explore the incredible promise and the terrible peril of the asylum. From there, we'll take a journey into the mind with Freud, witness the pretty shocking era of rewiring the brain, and finally land in our modern era, looking at freedom and its challenges. For most of human history, mental distress wasn't an issue of the mind as we think of it. Nope. It was a problem with a physical body, a defect, an imbalance, or even some kind of foreign entity that had moved in. And because of that, the treatments were, you guessed it, intensely physical. And this brings us to the most crucial question, the one that's going to guide us through this whole story. At every single stage, the treatments were a direct reflection of what people believed was the root cause of the illness. And if you can understand their theory of the problem, their solutions, no matter how bizarre they seem to us now, start to make a kind of horrifying sense. Okay, so our first stop covers a huge stretch of time. It starts 7,000 years ago with a procedure that is just startlingly direct, trephination. Flash forward thousands of years to the 1600s, and the focus shifts from spirits to bodily fluids, with things like bloodletting and purging. Then, as we get into the 17th century, the solution becomes less about fixing the person and more about just getting them out of sight. And that leads to the rise of asylums. So, trepanation. The logic, as strange as it sounds to us, is actually pretty consistent. I mean, if you believe that mental illness is caused by an evil spirit trapped in someone's head, well, what's the most direct solution? You create an exit. This ancient practice of drilling a hole in the skull wasn't just random violence. It was basically a surgical intervention based on a supernatural diagnosis. The problem was an intruder, and this was the eviction notice. By the 1600s, the theory had shifted a bit, away from spirits and more toward an early, kind of weird version of biology. The thinking was that the body was governed by 4 fluids, or humors. So mental illness, well, that was just an imbalance of these fluids. The treatment then was to rebalance them by physically removing the excess through bleeding, induced vomiting, or purging. Again, the cause was seen as physical, something inside you that needed to be forcibly removed. All right, let's jump forward to the 18th and 19th centuries. This is where we get one of the most significant and ultimately tragic chapters in our story, the rise of the asylum. But it didn't start as the house of horrors we see in the movies. It actually began with a truly revolutionary and humane idea called moral treatment. Now, the core idea of moral treatment was absolutely radical for its time. It was the belief that people with mental illness could actually get better if they were just treated with kindness and dignity. It completely rejected the idea that patients were wild animals. Instead, it argued that a cure was possible, not through physical punishment, but through compassionate care in a structured environment. So what did this actually look like? Well, thanks to reformers like Philippe Pinel in France and William Tuke in England, it meant no more chains, it meant creating quiet hospitals out in the country, patients had meaningful work and recreation. The whole vibe was meant to be supportive, almost like a family. And here in the United States, a school teacher named Dorothea Dix became its most powerful champion, crusading across the country for this new, humane approach. But that beautiful promise, it quickly turned to peril. The noble ideals just crashed against a harsh reality. As reformers like Dix succeeded, states built these huge public asylums. But they were always underfunded. They became massively overcrowded. The promise of kindness and a cure just devolved into a grim reality of poor sanitation, the return of restraints,
and the asylum's main job shifting from treatment back to just containment. Now, at the turn of the 20th century, a completely new revolution started brewing. This one wasn't about buildings or social reform. It was a journey inward, into the unseen world of the patient's mind, and it was led by a Viennese neurologist you've probably heard of, Sigmund Freud.
And this was a seismic shift. I mean, think about it. For thousands of years, the problem was in the body, spirits, fluids, bad biology. Freud comes along and says, no, no, no. The real cause of our distress is hidden inside us, in the unconscious mind. He claimed that our conscious thoughts and behaviors are powerfully driven by feelings, thoughts, and memories we aren't even aware of. Freud thought of the unconscious as this huge reservoir. It's where we shove all our traumatic childhood experiences, our forbidden desires, our painful emotions. We repress them. But just because they're out of sight doesn't mean they're gone. Freud believed this stuff is constantly fighting to get out, and it shows up in disguised ways, like in our dreams, slips of the tongue, and all sorts of neurotic symptoms. To explain this internal battle, Freud came up with his famous model. You've got the id, that's the primal instinctual part of us that just wants what it wants right now. Then you have the superego, that's our inner moral compass, the voice of society and our parents. And caught right in the middle is the ego, the rational negotiator trying to make the id happy without ticking off the superego, all while dealing with the real world. For Freud, mental distress was just the result of this never-ending war inside us. So the whole goal of his therapy is captured perfectly in this famous phrase. The idea is to strengthen the ego, to basically shine a light on all that hidden stuff. By using techniques like free association and dream analysis, the patient could make those hidden conflicts conscious and hopefully finally gain some control over them. But while psychoanalysis was busy exploring the inner world, a totally different and much more aggressive approach was gaining steam in the mid-20th century. This path led right back to the physical brain, but this time it was treated less like the home of a complex psyche and more like a piece of faulty computer hardware. The philosophy here was starkly mechanical. If someone was suffering, it must be because their brain's wiring was messed up. So the solution wasn't to talk, it was to intervene directly and physically, to basically hit the reset button with a coma, jolt the system with a seizure, or even just surgically cut the connections that were believed to be causing the problem. And when you look at these interventions, you just see this pattern of escalating aggression against the brain itself. You had insulin coma therapy, which came with a mortality rate as high as 10%. Metrazole therapy used a stimulant to cause such violent seizures that patients would often break their own bones. And then there was the lobotomy, a procedure that severed connections in the brain's frontal lobes, which, horrifyingly, could be done in just 5 minutes. And here's maybe the most shocking fact of all. The lobotomy wasn't some fringe back-alley procedure. Its creator was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1949. It's just a stark reminder of how accepted these brutal physical interventions once were. They were seen not as butchery, but as cutting-edge medicine. Okay, so the failures of those giant asylums, combined with the development of the first real psychiatric medications in the 1950s, that set the stage for our final chapter, the great exodus from the institutions and the move toward community-based care. And here we see another profound shift in thinking. Suddenly, the source of the problem wasn't spirits or humors or the unconscious or even bad brain wiring. The problem was the asylum itself. The idea of deinstitutionalization argued that locking people up for years was actively harmful and made them lose their independence and their skills. The best place for people to heal, the thinking went, was in their own communities. And for so many people, this freedom was absolutely transformative. This quote comes from a study of people who moved out of long-term hospitals. And it's just so powerful, isn't it? I like to run my own life before I die. It just perfectly captures the profound increase in choice, control, and simple human dignity that people felt. After years, sometimes decades, they finally got to run their own lives. But the transition wasn't a fairy tale ending for everyone. Research shows that while community living is seen as way better, it comes with its own risks. People can become socially isolated. Some report that their physical health declines. And families, while they're relieved, often face a whole new set of stressors and need support themselves. So the crucial point here is that freedom isn't enough. You need robust, personalized, and sustained community support to make it work. So, this journey from chains to community shows a history of constant change. Each era, with its own theory of the mind, left its mark. We've gone from the body to the asylum, into the mind, back to the brain, and finally, out into the community. It leaves us with a pretty critical question. As science keeps unlocking the mysteries of the brain and mind, what on earth will the next chapter in this long and complex story look like?